So obviously, it's been a long time since we've done one of these sessions and sort of laid out the roadmap and heard from everyone what they think. I'm excited to see a bunch of people joining that I know are active in the community. I see several verified moderators here, people who run search engines, other projects on top of OpenBazaar. So it's great to have you all here. So we laid out a simple agenda in a blog post yesterday. We're going to briefly run through introductions of the OB1 team, talk about some recent releases we've done, and then upcoming releases. And then I'm going to attempt to quickly walk through the 2018 roadmap. Now, the roadmap, there's a link in the chat here to the roadmap if you haven't read it yet. I'm just going to be talking through it. This doesn't support screen share quite yet. So if you want to look through it as I talk about it, check out that link. I'll try to go through that quickly. And then the bulk of the time is just hearing from you guys about what you think about what our priorities are, what, just your feedback on the roadmap, generally speaking. So I'm going to dive right in first with introductions of the OB1 team. So I'll start with myself. I'm Sam Patterson. I've been involved with OpenBazaar pretty much since Brian started it in the middle of 2014. I'm called the operations lead just because we couldn't think of a better title, but I'm not a developer. I don't get into the code like many or most of the people on the team. So I sort of help manage the non-development side of it. And then when we created the company OB1, I was a co-founder of that company as well. Brian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hey, everybody. I hope you guys know who I am, but maybe not. Brian Hoffman. And I guess I'm technically considered the project maintainer for all of OpenBazaar, but I do a lot less coding these days. But and I'm also CEO of OB1.
Jen, you want to go ahead?
Hello, I'm Jen Cloud. I am the marketing and community manager for OB1 and also helping along with the OpenBazaar brand. I have been involved with OB1 since the summer of 2016. So it has been an exciting couple of years. This year is going to be our biggest yet, so really excited about this call today and to start drilling down into these plans with you guys.
Let's see. Mike G., you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a backend developer and currently watching the server. I work on the code on the backend and bring updates to the backend and work on the protocol.
Thank you. Josh.
Yeah, hi. I'm Josh. I lead our front-end development work. That's about it.
All right. I'm looking for other folks on the call that are part of the OB1 team through the user list. I see a Chris. I don't know if that's our Chris or not, but I don't think he has the ability to join on the microphone, at least according to his icon. If I've missed anyone from the team, go ahead and speak up. Okay, good deal. All right, so I'd like to briefly touch on where we've been recently, and then where we're going in the immediate future before we talk about the long to midterm future. So 2.0.17 was the first full release for OpenBazaar 2.0. That happened November 1st. All of the 2.0 releases before that were beta or alpha, I suppose. And of course, based on who's on the chat, I think everyone understands generally why 2.0 was a big deal, why it was important, why getting on IPFS was necessary and unlocked a lot of new functionality. And then after that was released, 18 through 21 were largely bug fixes. There weren't a lot of new features being introduced in those releases. But the 2.1 release was a major release. That came out in, I believe, late January. Excuse me. And the biggest feature in that was the inclusion of new cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin Cash and Zcash. And we've talked about in the past why we chose to do that. Part of it, of course, was high Bitcoin fees in the fall that made OpenBazaar, less appealing just from a financial perspective. But it's not just that; it's also the fact that we view OpenBazaar as a platform for trade where people have as much optionality as possible. So that was the first major release after the 2.0. Excuse me. And then the next release, 2.1.1, included another major feature, which was verified moderators. We noticed that there were people on the network using moderators to scam. So they would set up either a moderator themselves or they would collude with a moderator. And people who didn't really understand the dispute resolution system very well, didn't understand how to determine what a good moderator was versus a bad one, were selecting the bad moderators and were just having their money stolen. And so OB1 offers a service, along with there's a new feature in the client where we verify moderators and you can choose them in the checkout instead. And I know there's at least 3 verified moderators in this call right now, which is great. So thank you all for offering that service. We appreciate it. So that's everything that's happened in the past few months. What's happening coming up next is really there's kind of 2 features that are going to be included in the next upcoming release. The major one is cryptocurrency listings. So we've always had 3 listing types within OpenBazaar: physical goods, digital goods, and services. Now we're adding a 4th. People will be able to sell cryptocurrencies, buy and sell directly with each other. Initially, it's more or less kind of a swap thing. Oh, we'll talk more about it in the roadmap because it's in the roadmap, but it has been already underway and is nearing completion now. So we're excited about that one. And the other is opt-in stats gathering. Because we built OpenBazaar to be very private, we really don't. We being the developers and the OB1 team, we don't really have that much of an insight into the network, what's happening, which sometimes hinders development. We're not exactly clear where people run into problems, when they have, they run into issues, or how the order flow, works, that kind of thing, where people get stuck. So we're going to be allowing people to opt in to giving us statistics on how they use the application, which hopefully is going to better inform development and let us focus on where we need to focus on. So that's what's upcoming. Anyone from the OB1 team have anything to add on this section?
I mean, I think we'll probably get into it a little bit later, but in terms of features that we're going to be looking towards the future for, I think there'll be quite an interesting shift in how we address some of these things. And actually, you know what? I'm not going to get into it. I'm sure you have it later on. So.
Yeah, alrighty. Okay, so I'm going to now jump into an overview of the roadmap. Going to just be talking through the roadmap post that we have on the site, which is linked in the chat. If anyone has thoughts or questions about specific things we discuss as I'm talking through it, please jump in either on audio or in the public chat. If I don't notice someone in the chat, someone feel free to jump in and let me know about it. Okay, so the biggest part of the new roadmap and the highest priority that we have over the next year or so is getting OpenBazaar onto new platforms. It's always been a desktop experience, mostly because of the limits of the tech, but we know how important it is to get it both on mobile and on the web. And initially, the mobile, we've been looking to do a mobile app for quite some time. And initially, it was basically a front end, a client, that connected to a server being hosted somewhere else. But we eventually were able to figure out a way to have the entire node running on the mobile device itself. It's been somewhat difficult to put this all together, and it's not completed now, but it's far enough along that you can see some videos of us sort of testing it and working on it, and we expect it to come out later this year. Now, we do have to clarify that this is an OB1 product. This is an OB1 mobile application. So it's going to be using OB1 services, and it's not the sort of reference client that we have on desktop. That's just neutral and allows any services in. This is specifically focused on OB1. Hopefully down the road, it'd be great to see a neutral OpenBazaar mobile app from the community. But as I mentioned, initially, the OB1 app is put out by us. And there is a video included in the roadmap that sort of shows what it looks like thus far. The other important platform that we're going to be highly prioritizing is the web. And of course, that's, mobile's difficult enough, as I'm sure you guys know. Building anything fully distributed makes everything 10 times or 100 times harder. But web is even more difficult. And we're going to be approaching getting OpenBazaar on the web in 3 different phases. The first is browse only, where basically it's just going to be a website where you're able to view listings, stores, whatever on the website itself, which is relatively simple to do, and we're already pretty far along in building that. But of course, the main limitation there is that you can't really interact with anything on the network other than see it. The next step is a buy-only website, and of course, that's substantially more difficult to do. So, as I'm sure you guys know, we're built on top of IPFS. There is an IPFS JavaScript implementation, which is still pretty early on. But down the road, the hope is that IPFS can fully run in a browser, and thus OpenBazaar will be able to fully run in a browser. So as of now, we're not certain exactly how the buy-only is going to be built, whether or not it requires IPFS.js or something else. But definitely the scope, the difficulty of building it is going to be substantially more difficult than the buy-only. So we don't have a specific timeline, but we expect it could take us into 2019 for the buy-only version.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off, but this is another one of those things where we really would love as much participation from the community as possible to help us drive that. So as Chris was mentioning, I'm sure some of you guys have some questions and thoughts on where we're going to go with all of this. So I certainly don't want. While we're organizing this, I think one of the themes of this discussion and how we're going to be moving forward is that we want more community support. We want to be able to get people more involved and not feel like it's like OB1 is telling you from the mountain that this is what's happening. So hopefully we can, and this may not be the right venue to have that discussion, but we definitely want to encourage that. So please don't feel discouraged from speaking out if you have ideas about how we could do certain things.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the buy only, and then the last phase is sort of the holy grail, which is to run an entire OpenBazaar node fully in a browser. And that at this point we really just don't know. If that's possible, when that's possible, how long it will take. So that's definitely further out than this roadmap is meant to look sort of over the next year or so. It's probably further out than that. But of course, we would love to have as much help as possible in getting to that end goal. we know the IPFS team themselves, the Protocol Labs guys, are aware that it's something we're interested in, and are sort of looking into a few ways that it can hopefully make it easier for us. But it's still pretty early. IPFS.js is still fairly early in its development. So that is web and mobile. The next section is developer support, which actually ties into the last section, which is the creation of a foundation. OpenBazaar has moved very quickly. We made our 1.0 version obsolete within about a year and a half with the 2.0. And to get it out the door, to get it out in people's hands, we didn't focus as much on supporting developers as we'd like to. And so things like documentation is pretty poor at this point. We recognize that. So we're going to start focusing more on improving documentation for the existing repositories, and then ensuring that anything new that we create that's open source has the documentation to match as we build it moving forward. We also want to be able to focus on supporting software other than just the main client and server repositories. There are a few folks, Chris Troutner is one, who's put out a library that really we haven't really helped with or given developers those tools because we're focused on the primary sort of reference implementation. We'd like to change that. Formalizing the protocol separate from the reference implementation. Effectively, the protocol has been more or less synonymous with the reference implementation in the past, which is not ideal and makes it more difficult to build new things on top of the network. So that's a big undertaking, but we think it's important. And then offering bounties for bugs or new features, or for people to build on top of the network. We haven't really put out a lot of incentives for folks to do that. It's kind of been, if they have a cool idea and they pursue it themselves, great, that's exciting to see, but we haven't attempted to, create any incentives to do so. So the next section is the token. This is something that is definitely still in flux. We're still trying to figure out the best way for a token to make sense in the ecosystem. And honestly, we don't have a lot of details to share right now with where we're at. The only thing I can say is if you're interested in learning more about the token and you haven't read anything about it yet, or you want to learn more about the token moving forward, visit openbazaar.org/token. That has a very basic overview of how we think the token is going to be useful in OpenBazaar, as well as the opportunity to sign up for updates. When we have more information, we will send those things out. The next section is new features that we want to include in the client. I want to stress that these new features are going to take a lower prioritization than getting OpenBazaar on web and mobile. It's not as though we think OpenBazaar has become perfected and has all the features it needs to succeed, but we do think that getting it on those other platforms takes a higher precedence than adding some more functionality into the current client. But I would like to hear from folks if they agree or disagree with that approach or have different features they want to see. So I'll quickly go through these features. The first one is cryptocurrency listings. We already briefly talked about those. This is something that, as I said, is mostly built already and will be coming out with the next release. Initially, it's going to be more or less sort of like a swap market. People will offer currencies to each other at market price, and then we'll manually verify that the funds have come through. And someone can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think we're using an API for prices that allows a pretty substantial number of cryptocurrencies to be sold. I don't know the official number, but it's Does anyone on the call know how many currencies will be supported at release?
I don't know the exact number, but it is pretty large.
Yeah, like I think it's over 100 or something, but maybe that's wrong. It's pretty substantial, and we think we can get more moving forward. Basically, as long as there's an API to pull the price in, you'll be able to offer the coin for sale. The next,
Hey,
yeah, go
Sam,
ahead.
since we're on this, thanks. Since we're on this topic of the cryptocurrency listings, what did you guys have a discussion as terms of? I know there was kind of an open question as to whether they'd be offered at market prices or premiums, and can you talk about if you guys have made any decisions on that?
Yeah, so anyone else can jump in if they have a different thing to say on this. We view this as an iterative feature for sure. Being able to adjust or mark up the price is something that I expect would be added eventually if there's demand for it, but it's not going to be the initial release. The initial feature is going to just allow people to sell it at market price. And again, it's almost more of a swap market than it is really an exchange. There's no order book, right? Like it's not an exchange in the sense that there are people posting bids and asks and fulfilling them. It's just people directly selling currency that they manually verify to each other currently at market price. If we put it out there and it's clear that folks say, hey, listen, this is cool, but we're not going to be using it unless we're able to add a markup, then that would be an iteration that we would then include.
That sounds pragmatic.
Yeah, and that's like I really wanted to see that the markup, but I think in talking about trying to get this out as quickly as we can and get it into users' hands and see how they use the product, we're going for the sort of minimum viable product approach for this feature, and then we'll go from there. Yeah. OTC, right, over-the-counter trade. Thank you, Mike. That is a better term. You're right. This is effectively an over-the-counter marketplace. All right, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is requests. Right now, OpenBazaar basically sellers are the only ones that put information out into the marketplace about what they have to sell. With requests, buyers will be able to say what they want to buy. Which hopefully makes this basically a two-sided marketplace where there's a lot more information about who wants what. And I'm really excited about this feature to see, if this can create sort of that loop, that cryptocurrency loop of people staying within their coin in the ecosystem. But should be relatively easy to implement, but it's not the highest priority for us. But we've been talking about this one for a long time, so it'll be good to see. The next is automated digital downloads. Right now, if you sell digital products, you have to manually send a link once it's to confirm it. Obviously not an ideal user experience. So now, once funds are received and have received a confirmation, the link is automatically sent to the buyer. So send money, get file kind of thing, which is something that digital vendors have been asking for pretty much since the start. The next is improved content discovery. This is something in the past we've called channels, and basically the idea is it's going to allow people to browse instead of just using the search engines. You'll basically have curated content on the network based on any criteria that the curators want. It could be a location, it could be how popular the good is, how many reviews it has, whatever criteria they want, they can curate these lists, and then these lists are going to be able to be distributed throughout the client. So you can choose kind of which channel, which curator you want to see their listings. And the last feature is better reputation and identity. One example of that is right now store names are just a hash. They're not human readable, not friendly. For folks who were involved in the version 1, you'll remember that we had a system that allowed you to map that store name to a handle, which was done through Blockstack at the time. We're looking into different ways to do this. One is to use DNS and allow that to be resolved in client, which is something we're already working on. And the other is to, again, use something like Blockstack. And we're not 100% certain kind of which way we're going there, and also other ways to improve reputation. But we do know that it's an important part of the marketplace, and so we know that we're going to be tackling it. But this is still a bit fuzzy. We definitely like help from people thinking through how to build better reputation and identity systems. So the last point on the roadmap is the creation of an OpenBazaar foundation. So as everyone on this call I'm sure knows, OpenBazaar is open source. It's always going to be open source. But OB1 has been the primary leader of the development for most of OpenBazaar's history. And we specifically chose not to monetize the protocol directly, right? We didn't want to introduce fees. We didn't want to introduce barriers to entry. And the vision has always been that OB1 is going to offer voluntary services to users on the network. That's the way that we monetize. But what we want to ensure is that long-term, the protocol, the network itself, is maintained, and that there is an organization that is focused on doing that, and can also help with sort of the community management and that sort of thing. So we're going to be creating a nonprofit organization to do that. And the specific sort of mission of what we're doing is kind of being decided now. But the overall goal is that there always needs to exist a place online where people can engage in free, private, permissionless trade. And the foundation is going to be solely dedicated to making sure that that space and is maintained. And the incentives are such that it will continue to do so as long as possible. So I have some background in this area, nonprofits. That's where I worked before I joined OB1. But if anyone has experience here or has thoughts on this model, I would certainly love to hear from them. All right, well, that is an overview of the roadmap. So I'd now like to open it up to any feedback on what you've just heard or what you've read in the roadmap. Any questions you have. Generally, just like to hear what everyone thinks.
That last thing you said there about the foundation, I was just going to recommend, and I think I've done this in Slack before, the Node.js Foundation. They've got a podcast called Request for Commits. The guy who runs the thing called Mikhail, I can't remember his last name, but Request for Commits is the podcast where they talk to a lot of popular open source projects like Mocha and Vue, and anyways, great blueprint for creating a foundation. They took the Node.js Foundation from 3 contributors to over 90. So highly recommend looking into them when you guys are considering how to shape the foundation.
Okay, great. Thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah, Chris, this is Mike. I did take the liberty of reviewing your document, and we are incorporating a lot of that. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, Brian put in the chat just a reminder to, if you could introduce yourself while you speak for everyone's understanding. Great, I would appreciate you doing that. Yeah, Jason's jumping in and saying that the buy only JavaScript version in browser is awesome. Downloading the app is one of the bigger barriers keeping people from shopping or trying OB. I think that's been borne out in looking through the stats on the OpenBazaar website. Well, not just the fact that downloads are where people drop off, but also a pretty substantial proportion of the visitors to the website are on mobile. And of course, we can't give them anything right now at all. So between web and mobile accessibility, we feel like it's going to make OpenBazaar much, much more widely accessible than before. Matthew Zipkin adds that requests are going to be a great category for job listings, which is a really neat idea. There are a few crypto-specific places that have job listings out there already, but I think it could be really neat to see that on OpenBazaar as well. People can build on top of the protocol, and we've not tried to prevent people from using the name. What we do want to do is make sure that people don't, impersonate or attempt to, for example, sell a token called OpenBazaar or something like that. So in that sense, we're sort of watching the usage of the name, but we want people out there using OpenBazaar as widely as possible.
I mean, and also to your point, as far as trademark is concerned, we as in Sam, myself, and Sanchez, and one other individual, Dionysus Zindras, we actually registered a trademark for OpenBazaar as more of a defensive move to basically do what Sam was mentioning. But we are actually kind of talking about what we want to do about that going forward in respect to the foundation. So, I'm not committing to this yet. I mean, obviously we haven't decided, but one scenario could be that we transfer the trademark to the foundation to manage rather than it be, solely ours.
Yep, agreed. Kornilov adds in the chat that he believes a good search engine is crucial to get more users. And Mike points out that we do allow third parties to integrate search into the app today, and like this approach and plan to expand on it. That is definitely true. We're I think pretty proud of the way the third party search integration happens in the 2.0 client. It allows people to really easily add new search providers themselves. And we've seen that be used. So actually, Bazaar Dog is on the call right now. He has a really cool search engine with a whole lot of really neat filters and stuff that people can add into the client themselves. And of course, OB1 also offers search. And it's up to the search provider themselves to determine if they want to offer another front end into the network, or if they just offer it within the client themselves. And we've seen both. Several service providers offer a website where you can look at stuff, and some just offer it within the client. But it's flexible enough to do both of them. And hopefully, the ease with which you can create those services means that competition will create really, really good providers. And I think already I'm pretty happy with the search engine ecosystem, but hopefully it only gets better from here. Julie asks if the call is being recorded because she is unable to hear, which is unfortunate. But yes, it is being recorded. So we will post this online later and make sure that we put it out on Slack and Twitter and the usual places. Kornilov asks in the chat if we have a legal opinion about the OpenBazaar token. I mean, that's obviously it's a very broad question. This is a very fast moving environment where we're getting a lot of information from a lot of different players. And of course, we want to move and act, cautiously and make sure that we're making the right steps here. So I don't have anything specifically to relay other than we are trying to talk with the most informed people about the current state of the ecosystem before we make any specific steps. I've just gotten a message in my browser that I'm disconnected. I don't know if others are still able to hear me or see the chat.
Not sure if you can hear me, but I'm having trouble muting and sending messages.
Yeah, I am able to hear you, Chris.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm getting a message that I'm disconnected, but obviously you can hear me, so I'm not disconnected.
I think it's like what happened last time. It seems as though some people are disconnected and some aren't, which is obviously unfortunate.
Well, I was going to put a question in the chat for everyone who doesn't know my voice. This is Chris Troutner. I'm doing a P2P VPS project built on top of OpenBazaar. Mike, you mentioned that IPFS.js is kind of unstable, and I was just wondering if I'm not going to hold you guys to anything. I was just wondering if you could give an update on where that's at in terms of the differences between the Go version and the JS version, and sort of just what your thoughts are around that whole release with IPFS.js. And I honestly haven't looked into it too deep, so I'm kind of looking for pointers on where I can start looking into it.
I think that question was posed to Mike, but I'm not sure if Mike is able to hear you or respond. I don't have enough knowledge to answer that question myself, other than to say I've heard that right now IPFS.js doesn't really have like the DHT component active, or if it does, it's in a very limited capacity compared to the Go version. So that's the biggest area that I'm aware still needs to be worked on. Otherwise, that's a question you'd have to pose to the backend guys, Mike, Chris, Tyler, or I mean, even more appropriately, the Protocol Labs team themselves, because they're obviously going to have more specific knowledge of that.
Yeah, right. Roger.
Well, it seems as though the chat is not functioning, and audio only seems to be functioning for some portion of the community. So at this point, I suppose we can break. I'm disappointed that we're not able to fully hear from you guys on feedback because of technical issues, but I do appreciate the feedback that we got. What I'd like to do is just plug our Slack group right now, because that is a great place to continue this conversation. I think the best way to do that is to visit, let me double check this link before I give it to you. I believe it's openbazaar.org/Slack. Yes, that's right. If you want to join our Slack, visit openbazaar.org/Slack. It's going to actually put you through sort of a small questionnaire. We're forced to do that because we had issues with spam, and the way the invitations were set up and the way Slack was set up, they gave us guff about the number of invitations out there. But regardless, if you go through that process, we will see your application immediately. We'll let you in, and then we can continue this conversation there. We'll look into making sure in the future that we have the technical underpinnings of the call rock solid, so that we don't run into these issues again. But thank you everyone for showing up. Please continue the conversation on Slack, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, right. It's Alexander. I'm a part of the team working on Zencash integration, and we had a few questions regarding that work we've done and how we can integrate and actually have our work merged into OpenBazaar. And we've done it based on Zcash implementation that you have, but we see that there is a few pull requests that were rejected because of that binary dependency. And
so
we are not sure what we need to go next and what to do.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, thanks for the question. I'll have to admit that that's beyond my specific knowledge, what the requirements are for that, or where you guys are at in the integration process. We are in the middle of actually changing the way that the wallets work. Right, it was in the past basically more or less a requirement. excuse me. That you have an SPV wallet, or you can have a full node, but that's definitely not recommended. We've actually not had a good experience with that on Zcash. But we're also changing the wallet so that it supports an API sort of system, so you don't have to run like SPV even at all. And I think my suspicion is, as we're making that change over, that you guys are sort of like caught in the middle of this transition, and we're not sure where to put what you're doing. I don't know. I don't know the full details of that, but that's something that we can absolutely look into. And you say there's an open pull request now for what you've done?
No. We've just seen that there was a few similar ones, and they were rejected or just put on hold.
Yeah, so we'll try to get you guys some specific clarity then on how best to proceed.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. The base requirement is to have a working SPV wallet, so that users don't have to have a binary running. Beyond that, we do make decisions partially based on what the user base for coins are and whether it adds a maintenance burden for us. Currently, if we merge in code from someone else, we have to maintain it in the future. And I'll just be honest, we're not super eager to maintain a lot of wallets that we're not familiar with, because that could seriously slow down our development. We are working, not in the near term, but sort of the medium to long term, on building a plugin system where it would be possible for users to plug in any wallet they want, and it could be maintained separately from the project. So if you're willing to wait for that, that would be the easiest way to get any coin you want into the project, but it's a ways off.
Yeah, and I would just point out the obvious as well.
Yeah, I see, but it's...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, sorry. So you're not sure with the timeline of that plugin system, and it could be in a month or maybe a few months. Am I right?
I would say no sooner than a few months. I mean, it's not something we're working on right now. It's something we're planning to work on in the future.
Okay, yeah, I
it's
see.
not
Thanks.
for sure. One thing I would point out, I mean, of course, this is open source, and if for some reason the coin integration isn't likely to happen in the core client itself because it doesn't meet the criteria that we've laid out, then you can fork it and put your coin in there and have it be a marketplace specifically for that coin. I recognize that's not an ideal situation, but it is a way to ensure that you can use the open source software without it being integrated into the core reference OpenBazaar client.
Yeah, I see. But then we would need to create some search provider for the Zen cache.
Well, not necessarily.
Am I right?
No, if someone were to fork OpenBazaar, and the only change they made was to add an additional coin, that version of it would still interact with the rest of the network normally, and the rest of the network would be able to see those listings. And that includes most search engines would still crawl those listings. It would just be the case that other clients would not be able to buy or create listings in that coin.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see.
And that would be true for the plugin system too. Once we get the plugin system working, obviously, if someone hasn't added, a Zcoin wallet, they can't buy something in Zcoins. But presumably, then they'd be able to add that wallet.
Yeah, so there should be some way to add this to search providers for the filtering and easier search on the products sold.
That's true, and we kind of leave that up to search providers. Each search provider works differently. So they may have a system to request adding coins to their filter, or they may even automatically detect coins. Just depends on the implementation. I mean, the OB1 search engine does not currently automatically detect coins to add to the filter, but that's something we may add if we see enough, coins we don't recognize showing up in the network.
And is there some repository we can look at for search providers, or how to implement if we will decide to create one?
Yeah. So OpenBazaar has a process similar to the Bitcoin improvement proposals, the BIP process, called OBIP, and there is an OBIP, at least one out there that clarifies the what a search provider needs to do to be compatible. And if you want to learn more about the search one specifically, I recommend I can connect you to someone on our team, Tyler, who manages the OB1 search and actually wrote that OBIP, so he would be a good person to talk to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Is there anyone else that's still on this call who would like to jump in and ask questions or give us some feedback? I'm also interested to know if there are any vendors out there who are able to give us their thoughts on where we're headed. The interface is sort of crashed, so I don't know how many users are still out there. But anyone that has audio, please jump in if you'd like to contribute. So thanks everyone again for joining. I'll reiterate, please continue the conversation on Slack. And if you have any more questions or thoughts, I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again, everyone.